Before the movie starts, I would like to remind everyone to silence their cell phones and please do not talk or text while the movie is playing. Also, content warning, as some stories in this video are disturbing. And if you have a story you would like to send, please go to astheravendreams.com and click the button to do so. And of course, thank you. I have a story about something that happened way back when I was only 11. It was about a party that happened at a local skating rink. This was back when everything worthwhile happened at the skating rinks, so if nothing else, you should be able to tell around when this happened. The rink was one of those ones that was set up to look like a disco. It had a lot of neon lights and a big disco ball that shot light spots all over the place. It was pretty well occupied every Friday and weekend, and a lot of kids my age would hold their birthday parties there. That's actually where this all happened, at a birthday party, specifically for my friend Henry. Henry was turning 12 and he wanted to have a bunch of us kids out at the skating rink. The party was going awesome. We were playing the arcade games, skating around the big rink, and ate some of their really cheap pizza. So, overall, it was a pretty dang good party for an 11-year-old me. Henry's parents had paid for everyone, but they didn't allow you to rent the whole rink, so there were people there that weren't part of the party. But then, about halfway through the party, a man walked into the rink. He must have been in his 50s, and he didn't have any kids with him, which was a bit odd since this was a skating rink. His hair was dirty and his eyes were bloodshot, and honestly, I don't know if he was homeless or just a fairly unkempt older man, but he looked completely out of place among a bunch of preteens celebrating a birthday party. Henry's parents were busy setting up the cake, so they didn't even notice him at first. He just stood there at the entrance and stared at us, watching all of us skate around and scowling. He didn't speak at first. He didn't really move. He just watched. I think I noticed him first, and I felt uncomfortable with how he just stared at me. It felt like he was trying to intimidate me, like he knew that I knew he was watching, and that he was 100% trying to let me know that I should be scared. I nudged my friend Jimmy, and I pointed him out. He asked who it was, and I shrugged, telling him that I didn't know. When I pointed him out, this guy finally started moving, which actually scared me even more. I was freaked out by this guy staring at me, but him starting to walk towards me was even worse. He held that horrible stare as he approached, and I just stood there frozen, thinking about what was going to happen. Henry's dad finally noticed him and approached him cautiously. I could see that he was trying to stop this guy from getting any closer to us kids, but I obviously couldn't hear him over the music. I could tell that the man was not happy to have been stopped, and after a few moments of the two men arguing, he pulled back and headbutted Henry's dad square in the nose, knocking him to the ground. This caused the chaos to start. Everyone had noticed what had happened and was watching this crazy man standing there and breathing heavily. The staff had paused the music and was pretty clearly trying to get the situation under control, but the second the music stopped, this man screamed, "I advise you all to leave if you don't want to die." This led to a chaotic situation unraveling as everyone started running for the front door. Us kids were all rushed out of the building, confused and scared. We all got out and to the end of the parking lot. Henry's mom asked us if we were all okay and making sure we were all there. Henry's dad took up the end. His face bloodied. I'm pretty sure this guy broke his nose with that headbutt. Obviously, someone had called the cops, because as we were all getting outside, a number of police cars pulled up and cops all dressed in body armor ran into the building, while the others asked us if we were all okay, and tried to figure out what was going on. Henry's mom tried to explain that this guy just ran in and threatened everyone, and that none of us had ever seen him before. Long story short, the cops got him restrained and arrested him. We found out that he didn't have any weapons or anything, so his threat was just that, a threat. And odds are he wouldn't have been able to actually do anything, but none of us wanted to take that chance. Odds are he was on something, and whatever it was caused his rage to boil over, and he opted to take it out on Henry's dad, and of course ruin our fun time. This was supposed to be a fun day for Henry, an innocent celebration to welcome him to his last year as a preteen. But instead, it turned into a nightmarish experience that none of us who were there would ever forget. That man's face was burned into my memory, and honestly, I'm beyond glad that I've never seen him again. I used to work at an organization for about 8 years that used to do office holiday parties. They would specifically throw a really big party for the Christmas season, as companies do, and they absolutely treated it as a moment for all of us to come together, to let loose, and celebrate another year of hard work. And I will say that we all took advantage of it. Well, for the most part. There was one year, about halfway through my tenure at that company, where the party didn't go as planned. And it was one of those nights where I don't think anyone involved will ever forget it. The company had actually put a lot of money into the party. The CEO actually wrote the check for the party and had rented out the local Dave & Buster's for the night. I don't know how much it cost to do so, but I can only imagine that it was excessive. They paid for the food, everyone had a couple drink tickets, and I wanted to say that it was one of the nicest parties I had ever been to. The night started off comfortably enough, but as time went on, it was pretty clear that some people were drinking more than they were supposed to, and some of the people started to get loud, or really giggly. One of my coworkers, a man that wasn't on my team but I thought that I knew pretty well, was a man named Joseph. Joseph had always been a bit of a wild card. He was an absolute genius based on the conversations I'd had with him, but he was also a bit volatile, unpredictable. He'd been on a corrective action for a month at this point, which was basically a situation of he screwed up, the boss wasn't happy, and he had to not screw up again for 90 days, or else he'd be canned. When I saw him at the party, he seemed to be in a decent mood, but that quickly changed when his manager, Leo, showed up. Leo had called him over during the party and they had a conversation that I couldn't hear, but I could see Joseph's face getting a bit red. Leo then patted him on the shoulder and walked away, leaving Joseph looking like he was about to explode. I made it a point to ask if he was okay, and he just shook his head before walking toward the bar and slamming his drink tickets down while just staring off at nothing in particular. Others noticed his anger too. A few people watched him as he walked away, but no one else said anything to him. We just kind of watched as this situation unfurled. There's something about train wrecks and the human psyche. About an hour had passed since that conversation occurred, and the whole time, I noticed that Joseph was downing drink after drink. This is a recipe for bad things being about to happen. I've seen the results of alcohol when it's mixed with anger, and I had a really bad feeling that something was about to happen. And of course, it did. Leo had been mingling with the other employees, playing some of the games down in the arcade, and then he walked up to the bar to get something to drink. I don't know if it was something else that Leo had said to Joseph when he was ordering, or if it was just that the timing was right, but Joseph stood up, straightened his back, and he slammed Leo in the face with a really hard right fist. It went from a single punch to Joseph grabbing Leo by the throat and slamming his head against the bar. Joseph's face was twisted with aggression. People screamed, glasses shattered, and chairs toppled over as everyone scrambled to get away, to escape this insane scene that was unfolding in front of us. Thankfully, there were police that were in the area, as this Dave & Buster's was in an outdoor mall, and it took 5 of us to pull Joseph off of Leo before the police were running in to get his hands in cuffs. I will never forget how Joseph laughed as he was being dragged out by the cops, and he shouted, "I guess I won't be needing that reference after all, huh, Leo?" So, obviously, the party was ruined, and we were trying to keep things calm while the paramedics rushed in to get Leo, rushed him out of the building, and then we were all left in the mess left behind by that crazy situation. Thankfully, Leo was mostly okay. He had some pretty nasty damage to his face, and his head, though. A lot of scars, and one of his eyes was actually permanently messed up. We later found out that the initial conversation that Leo and Joseph had was Leo telling Joseph to enjoy the party because he was officially fired after that night. Joseph apparently was going through some things at home as well, which explained why he was there alone, considering I knew that he was married. The alcohol was just the trigger that set him over the edge, and Leo just happened to walk up to the bar right when Joseph was having those dark thoughts. It was an unfortunate situation for Leo, and Joseph had pretty clearly just snapped. That night changed things for a lot of us, and it changed the holiday parties from then on. The company set up much smaller parties, more so just the teams having their get-togethers, no more alcohol whatsoever, and parties were no longer allowed to be places where any administrative decisions were made. So, basically, managers could no longer fire people at the parties. Every year after that, though, when it came time to plan for the parties, there were always whispers about Joseph and how crazy that night was. I want to preface this by saying that I don't really get out much, and the last few years have been pretty rough mentally. Just keep that in mind, I guess. I'm pretty reclusive, only going out when I need to for food, gas, or work. When I got invited to a party, I was initially hesitant, but the guy was cute, and I'd honestly gotten pretty tired of staying in my apartment alone every night, binge watching whatever on Netflix. The party was at 8, and I left my apartment at 7:45, deciding to walk instead of the 10-minute trek to the frat house to save gas. I know what it sounds like, 20-something girl walking to a party alone at night, but I honestly wasn't worried, even though I should have been in retrospect. I live in a big college town, a bunch of apartments and frat houses. Not much going on besides parties and cars driving up and down the street. I had personal experience with how quiet and peaceful the town was at night. I'd sometimes sit on the balcony after work and just watch the sky. I'd never hear a single sound, other than the crickets and the occasional kids playing out in the street later than they should be. The walk to the party was uneventful, as I knew it would be, and I got there just before it started. I was expecting the frat house to be full of bro dudes and girls, but when I arrived, there was just the guy who invited me. I asked where everyone else was, Don't worry. The party types don't show up until way later. Probably grabbing beer or something. Come on in. I knew that I shouldn't have. Every single part of my body was screaming at me to not go in. To wait for these supposed party types, so that I wouldn't be alone with this random guy. But I said, sure, okay. I don't know why I went in. Maybe I was desperate after all those years of just going to and from work, never really having friends, never spending any actual time in the town after moving in 3 years ago. Was that all this was? A desperate attempt to connect with someone? Even if it was a total stranger alone in a frat house. I followed him into the living room. A bunch of snacks and drink cups were on the table. A big karaoke machine in the corner and a bunch of solo cups lined up in a beer pong formation on the dining table, which had been moved into the living room, I guess to keep the party somewhat contained. We sat down and talked for a while. He was really nice, charismatic. We talked about his favorite movies. He was a huge Marvel movie guy. I was always into DC more, and we had a friendly argument about which was better. Before long, I started to realize how much time had passed. A half hour at least since we sat down. Then, there were a bunch of knocks on the front door, followed by someone rapidly ringing the doorbell. The guy, whose name we'll just refer to as D, got up gingerly and walked to the door and swung it open. "Let's get this party started, people!" It was the other people, there for the party. My chest, which had been tight the entire time waiting for either the party people to show up, or for this guy to make some creepy move on me, finally released and relaxed. The people flooded into the house. Kegs of beer, more snacks, and one guy was carrying a big black duffel bag, which I'd later find out was carrying a metric ton of weed. The party went on smoothly. For the first time in forever, I had a full conversation with someone new. A few new people, actually. Aside from work, I barely spoke to anyone. Not because I didn't want to, but because I was cripplingly anxious at all social interactions. Around 12 a.m., and I decided that I'd had one too many drinks, and also my fill of people for probably the next decade. So I say my goodbyes to D and headed out. Not before he asked for my number, which I so hesitantly and shakily gave. Not because I was creeped out, but because I think I genuinely liked this guy. I started my trek back home. Like I said before, it was only a 10-minute walk, but I was extremely drunk, so I had to make more slow and deliberate steps to assure that I didn't trip and smash my face into the pavement. Around what I can only assume was the 6-minute mark of the walk, and only about 2 to 3 blocks away from my apartment, I started to become aware of a weird and growing feeling of being watched. The walk so far had been me holding myself up against each wall along the way of every building, and taking really slow steps to keep balanced. I never really looked around me at all, just down at my feet and forward. I had a random urge to look back, so I did. And I wish that I hadn't. Or at least that's how I felt in that moment. Because if I didn't turn around, I wouldn't have seen the broad, dark figure tailing me from about 20 feet behind. It took my brain at least a solid 30 seconds to realize what I was seeing. I didn't stop walking, which was hard given the circumstances. At first I thought, nothing to worry about. You aren't the only person that can walk around at night. This is a party town after all. That was before I glanced down at their hand, and I saw the glint of light hit the edge of what I assumed was a long blade extending from their arm. My eyes widened, but before I could turn around and quicken my pace, I tripped over a trash bag that was laying on the sidewalk. I hadn't been looking forward for at least a minute, I was too focused on staring at the person behind me. I pushed myself up and turned back towards the person, who was now closer to 10 feet away from me. I spun around quickly and dizzily and started sprinting in the direction towards my apartment, screaming for help along the way. But there was nobody. Everyone must have either been at the party or a party. Whoever it was kept pace with me all the way until we reached my apartment. I stumbled up the stairs and I could hear the pounding of their footsteps on the hard concrete steps. As I reached for my door, I felt a hand grab my hair and pull me down to the ground. I let out a yelp as my head hit the solid ground. This person knelt down. It was a man, middle-aged. I could smell alcohol on his breath, and he was smiling this horrible, toothy grin at me. He put the blade against my cheek and literally whispered, "I've been waiting a long time for this." What the hell was that supposed to even mean? Who was this guy? I flailed my arms and legs, but he'd pinned me down. I thought for sure I was done for when I heard rapid footsteps coming up the stairs. Suddenly, a large shape hit the man hard, sending him flying into the railing and then over the side. I heard a loud thud as the man hit the ground below after plummeting 2 stories. That large shape actually turned out to be D. Turns out after I gave him my number and started walking home, he kept an eye on me to make sure that I would be okay, at least for as long as he could see me. He told me that right before I turned the corner and out of sight of the frat house, he noticed a man walking from the other side of the street, out near the woods, and the guy went in my direction. So he followed and caught up with us right as the man had pinned me down. The stalker, or whatever you want to call him, I guess, he didn't survive. He fell and had a head-on collision with the pavement. The police were called. Me and Dee gave our statements, and thankfully they left. Days later, we did find out the stalker's real name. I'll keep it undisclosed for safety reasons. But he'd had a bunch of photos of girls from the town, shot from what seemed to be hundreds of yards away. And in that pile of creepy photos, there were a few of me sitting on my apartment balcony at night, just staring at the sky, and also a few of me driving to and from work. I then moved out of that place a year later, and moved in with Dee. After all that happened, I actually gave him more and more of my time, until I realized I just didn't feel safe when he wasn't with me. So we started dating, and I never looked back. I'm still working on how I feel about this, and trying to open up more and more every day, and at least one good thing came out of that whole crap show. The creepiest part about that whole thing is the guy had to have waited in those woods for a few hours, because his house was like an hour away from the rest of the neighborhood. I can't imagine what would have happened if I left the party too early, after assuming that Dee was the bad guy, and decided to act on those earlier impulses. So, a few years ago, I had a friend that had finally gotten herself out of an incredibly abusive relationship. We all chipped in to help her out, and she was able to get her own place. I understand that the cycle of abuse is difficult to break. To get out of a situation where someone you love has turned to someone that loves to hurt you is an impossible situation to navigate. So, when she was able to get out of it and move out, I wanted to do something for her, with her permission, of course. So we got a few friends together and threw a housewarming party. Her new place is in the trendier part of town, filled with lots of cool places and young people. And honestly, the atmosphere in that part of town is absolutely electric. So I knew that if we had our little bash, it would be a great time. and we likely wouldn't have any issues. The place that she got wasn't exactly huge, so we worked out a good number of people that wasn't too much, and limited every invite to the person and one guest. A lot of people RSVP'd, and we actually had a decent head count by the time the party was scheduled. That night, the house was actually a bit more packed than we expected, but not overly so. The music was going, drinks were flowing, and everyone seemed to be in high spirits. I was loving the atmosphere, and my friend was nothing but smiles. So, overall, it felt like a success. Then, things took a bit of a creepy twist. About an hour into the party, I noticed a guy that I didn't recognize. There were a few people there that I didn't really know, but I was at least partially acquainted with them. This guy I had never actually seen before in my life. I assume he was someone's +1. He had these really piercing blue eyes. His head was shaved, and there was something about him that was kind of bothering me. I don't know if it was how he was staring at me or how his smile was a little bit too eager, but something was out of place about him. After I noticed him staring in my direction, I saw that he started walking over to me, and I thought that I was going to have to go through the whole rejection dance. He looked like an okay guy, but he wasn't quite my type, if you catch my drift. He stepped up to me and kind of pushed himself in front of me, saying, "Hey, I'm John." I tried to be polite, saying, "Hi, John. I'm my name. Are you enjoying the party?" Trying to be a nice host and all. He nodded, saying that he was, in his words, digging the vibe, and then kind of stood there saying nothing and just staring at me. I smiled and looked around awkwardly, waiting for him to say something, or for the opportunity to walk away. Then, it got even more awkward. He looked at me and said, "Hey, you want to go break in the bedroom?" I turned to look at him with a look like, "Bro, did you just ask that?" I shook my head and said, "John, I'm going to be as direct with you as I possibly can, and say that was honestly one of the creepiest things you could have ever asked someone that you just met." He stared at me like I had said something offensive, like he hadn't just asked me to go to the bedroom with him after introducing himself. He then says, "Well, let me know if you change your mind," and turns to walk away. If that was it, honestly, this would have been creepy, but not to the point of writing in a story. But of course, John was a creep. As the night wore on, I would turn and he would be there staring at me. He would randomly wave at me from across the room. He would accidentally run into me when I was going to the kitchen for whatever reason. One time is a coincidence. 2 or 3 times is intentional. It hit a point where it was kind of starting to feel predatory. I decided that I would confront him and tell him off. I walked over, and he perked up like I was about to take him up on his previous offer. I told him that I was not interested in him, and that he needed to knock off his creepy behavior. He laughed and said, "I'm just enjoying the party. You should calm down. Maybe smile a bit more." I rolled my eyes and told him to just leave me alone. But of course, he didn't. In fact, he got worse. It got to the point that he was actively following me around. Every step I would take, he would follow me 4 steps behind. And he was making it obvious. It hit a point where I was done, and I went to talk to my friend that we were throwing the party for, and if nothing else, she could ask him to leave. I told her that some guy named John was starting to piss me off, and I asked her if we could go ahead and tell him to leave, and she looked at me with a confused look on her face, asking who it was. I grabbed her and pulled her into the other room where I'd last seen him, and he was still standing there. I pointed toward him and said, "Him, John." The look on her face changed from one of confusion to shock. It was pretty clear that she knew who this guy was. I asked her what was wrong, and she responded with, "His name isn't John, it's James. And he's my ex's brother." How her ex's brother had known about where she moved, I don't know. Why he decided to show up at the party and be a creepy person towards at least myself, I'm not sure. But what I do know is that hearing that this guy was related to the man that had been physically abusive with my friend was enough to make me enraged. At that point, I said to hell with formalities, and I figured the best way to get this a-hole out of the house was to turn the party into a mob. I yelled for everyone's attention. The entire room of about 20-30 people turned to look at me, and I immediately pointed at James and said, "This man needs to leave. Now." Everyone turned their attention to James, who I think realized that he was going to have to go, or risk being forced out. He raised his hands in defeat, and started backing up towards the door. As he got to the door, he pointed towards my friend and yelled out toward her, "I'll let my brother know you said hi," and then turned and walked out. Now, I know that the story wasn't terribly scary, but I want to point out that, for my friend, and myself, this was a terrifying situation. Her abusive ex that she had finally escaped had possibly sent his brother to her new place, meaning he knew where she lived now, and this was very clearly his brother being willing to be a part of that cycle of abuse. This obviously left her in a really bad way, thinking that he was going to show up, and that he wanted to continue to ruin her life. So far, he hasn't done anything to her, and it has been a couple of years now, so maybe this was just one last slap in the face. But it was enough to make her feel uncomfortable and unsafe in her new home. She does have a new man in her life now, and I think that helps her some, but hopefully she never has to face her ex, or his brother, ever again. So, that, my friends, was a collection of some scary party stories, a wide array of stories on that one. Childhood skating rink parties, office parties, just house parties, if you will. Yeah. Really some scary stories there. Very, very happy with these ones. Very glad that these were all sent in and that I found them and such, and yeah. Just good stories is my point. They're good, creepy stories, and they go well together, so hopefully you all enjoyed them. Let's see, anecdote time. I don't do parties. I don't really do socialization events. Social events is the better way to put that. I think one of the last parties I went to was probably 2017. Would have been an office party before I was let go at that job. My work used to do... Sorry about the clearing my throat. My work used to do Halloween parties of all things. Not Christmas parties, but Halloween parties. They were fun. They were pretty big get-togethers. Everyone was in costume. It was corporate-wide, not company-wide, just corporate office. Yeah, just a lot of good times there. That was probably one of the few things I do miss about that place, is that those parties were actually fun, you know. Other than that, I don't really do socialization events. Obviously go to my niece and nephew's parties and such whenever they have them. Yeah. Anyways, friends, I hope you enjoyed the stories. If you did, please do hit that thumbs up button. If you're new to the channel, please consider subscribing, as that helps tremendously. You can also leave me a comment down below letting me know your thoughts. What was the last party you went to? Was it any good? Or was it just overall a bad time? Like these. Yeah. You can also do join or memberships where you get early access to content like this, as long as it gets up early. This one is not early. I apologize for that. I'm a little behind the middle of this week here. You can also super thanks, which is just a tip to the channel, which does help. Way more than I can express. Trust me, it helps a lot. And that's just about everything. Yeah. I do hope you're having a beautiful week so far, my friends. And I hope that I do see you again here very soon, but until then, remember, you are loved, you are valid, you are important, you are the best you that you can be. Do not forget it, and don't let anyone tell you otherwise. And until I see you again, my friends, much love and sleep well.